The air in the trauma bay at Metropolitan General was a thick cocktail of antiseptic, iron-rich blood, and fear. It was a smell Nurse Alara Vance knew intimately, a scent that clung to her scrubs and lived in her sinuses. She moved through the controlled chaos with a practiced slowness, a deliberate lack of urgency that her colleagues mistook for incompetence. They called her Bambi. It was because of her wide, perpetually startled eyes and the way she sometimes froze, just for a second, like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming car. She was currently trying to set up a suture tray, her fingers feeling clumsy and thick around the sterile packaging. The foil crinkled too loudly under her touch. Every sound she made felt like a mistake. "Vance, are you building a ship in a bottle over there, or preparing my tray?" The voice cut through the emergency room din like a shard of glass. Dr. Alistair Finch, Chief of Trauma Surgery, a man whose brilliance was matched only by his cruelty. He stood over a patient on bed 3, a god in his sterile kingdom, his handsome face contorted into its usual mask of arrogant impatience. "Coming, Dr. Finch," Alara murmured, her voice barely a whisper. She fumbled the tray, a pair of forceps clattering against the metal. A collective wince went through the junior staff. Greg, a nurse who orbited Finch like a sycophantic moon, let out a snicker. Alara felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. She hated this. Hated the feeling of being watched, of being judged, of being found wanting with every breath she took. She carried the tray over, her eyes fixed on the floor. She did not want to meet his gaze. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, cold and unforgiving. "Give me that," he snapped, snatching the tray from her hands. He scanned the instruments, his lip curling. "Is this a joke? Did you think I was stitching a teddy bear? Where is the 40-proline? Do you even know what that is, Bambi?" I thought you asked for Vicryl," she stammered, her mind going blank. The roar of the ER seemed to fade into a distant hum, replaced by a much older, much louder sound, the thumping whine of helicopter rotors. The memory was a ghost that haunted the edges of her vision. Finch slammed the tray down on a nearby counter. Instruments skittered across the stainless steel. "I don't think. I know. You listen. Your job is not to think. It is to do precisely what you are told, a task at which you are spectacularly failing." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper that was somehow more terrifying than his shouting. "You are a liability, Vance. A clumsy, slow, useless liability. Now get out of my sight before you contaminate something else with your incompetence." She backed away, her cheeks burning. She could feel every eye in the room on her. Chloe, a younger nurse with a kind heart, shot her a look of pure sympathy, but quickly looked away when Finch's gaze swept the room. Fear was a currency Finch traded in, and everyone at Metro General was deeply in his debt. Ilara retreated to the relative anonymity of the main corridor, her hands trembling. She pushed a stray strand of mousy brown hair from her face, her fingers brushing against the faint, silvery line of a scar that ran from her temple into her hairline. She quickly tucked the hair back, hiding it from view. Hiding everything. That was the goal. To be small, to be quiet, to be invisible. She had sought this life, this quiet corner of the civilian world where no one would expect anything of her. She had been running from the noise, from the screams, from the weight of the sky on her shoulders. She had thought that by pretending to be weak, she could forget she had ever been strong. But men like Finch had a nose for weakness, real or perceived. They were predators who patrolled the boundaries of the herd, looking for the one who stumbled. And Alara, she made sure to stumble often. She found refuge in a supply closet, the clean scent of linens and saline solution a temporary balm. She leaned her forehead against the cool metal shelf, taking a deep, shuddering breath. It was just a job, a penance, a way to feel normal again, even if normal felt like a costume she wore every day. The door creaked open. It was Chloe. "Are you okay?" Chloe asked, her voice soft. Alara didn't turn around. "I'm fine." "He's a monster," Chloe said, stepping inside and letting the door swing almost shut. "Everyone knows it. Don't let him get to you." "He's the chief of surgery," Alara replied, her voice flat. "He's allowed to be a monster." "It's not right. What he does to you. It's not... It's fine, Chloe. Really." Alara finally turned, forcing a small, fragile smile onto her face. "I just need a minute." Chloe looked like she wanted to say more, but the overhead speakers crackled to life. "Code 3, multiple casualty incident. MVA on the interstate. All available staff to the ambulance bay. All available staff." The moment of quiet was over. The monster was calling. Chloe gave her one last worried look and then hurried out. Alara stayed for a beat longer, closing her eyes. She imagined a different place. A place of roaring wind and biting sand. Of adrenaline that tasted like copper. Of a purpose so sharp and clear it could cut through steel. She imagined being someone else. Someone she used to be. Then she pushed the memory down, burying it deep. She was Nurse Vance. She was slow. She was clumsy. She was Bambi. She took another breath, straightened her scrubs, and walked back out into the chaos. The ambulance bay was a maelstrom of flashing lights and frantic motion. Paramedics shouted reports over the wail of sirens. One after another, gurneys were wheeled into the ER, each carrying a new map of human misery. A woman with a compound fracture, a man clutching his chest, a teenager with glass embedded in his face. It was the kind of night that tested the limits of the system, and it was the kind of night Dr. Finch lived for. He moved through the incoming trauma with the predatory grace of a shark in a feeding frenzy, barking orders, making life or death decisions in the span of a heartbeat. He was in his element, a conductor orchestrating a symphony of survival. Alara was relegated to the periphery, tasked with taking vitals and applying pressure to wounds. The simple things. Keep her out of the way. Don't let her touch anything important. She moved from bed to bed, her hands steady now, her mind partitioning the chaos into a series of small, manageable tasks. It was a coping mechanism she had honed long ago, in a place far more chaotic than this. Then, the last ambulance arrived. The paramedics who brought this one in were grim-faced. "John Doe," one of them said, his voice tight. "Found about 50 yards from the main pileup. Looks like he was thrown clear. No ID, no wallet. Dressed in rags. Looks homeless." The man on the gurney was a mess. He was unconscious, his face a swollen mask of bruises and cuts. He wore torn jeans and a threadbare jacket over a faded t-shirt. He was covered in grime, and a long, jagged laceration ran across his scalp, matting his dark hair with blood. Finch gave the man a cursory glance, his nose wrinkling in distaste. He was busy assessing another patient from the crash, a man in a tailored suit who was complaining loudly about his broken wrist. The man's expensive watch was still intact. "What have we got?" Finch demanded, his attention still on the man in the suit. "Unresponsive male, GCS of 7, the paramedic reported. "Pupils are unequal. Dropped his pressure in the rig. We pushed a liter of saline." Finch finally turned his full attention to the John Doe. He shone a penlight into the man's eyes, his expression dismissive. Another drain on society. Head bleed, obviously. He turned to a resident. "Get a line in him. Type and cross for 2 units, and send him for a head CT when there's a scanner free. He can wait. Mr. Albright over here needs his hand looked at, and I have a thoracic bleed in Bay 2. He waved a hand, already moving on. "Clean him up and stick him in a holding bay. Minimal intervention. We're not wasting a trauma bed on a vagrant who's probably brain dead anyway." The order was clear. The John Doe was not a priority. He was human debris, washed up by the tide of the accident. The staff began to move, following Finch's commands without question. The system was designed for triage, for making hard choices, and Finch had made his. Alara was assigned to the John Doe. She was the nurse you gave the hopeless cases to, the ones who were just waiting to be processed. She wheeled his gurney into a curtained-off alcove, a small pocket of relative calm. The sounds of the ER were slightly muffled here. It was just her and the broken man on the gurney. She started her work methodically. She attached a new blood pressure cuff, her fingers gentle on his skin. She began to clean the wound on his head, wiping away the blood and dirt. As she worked, her training took over. Not the training she had received in nursing school, an older, harder training, a training that lived in her bones. She began a full-body assessment, her hands moving with a sureness that would have surprised her colleagues. She ran her fingers along his limbs, checking for fractures, down his spine, checking for step-offs, across his chest. And that's when she felt it. On his left side, just below the rib cage, there was a subtle, hard ridge beneath the skin. It was about 2 inches long, perfectly straight. It wasn't a broken rib. The edges were too clean, too defined. Her fingers traced its outline, and a jolt went through her, a cold, electric shock of recognition. It felt like a subdermal data storage unit, the kind used by certain specialized military units, the kind she had been trained to identify, and if necessary, recover. Her heart began to beat a little faster. It was probably nothing, a coincidence, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Her eyes scanned him again, this time with a new, sharper focus. She wasn't just looking at a patient anymore. She was assessing a potential asset. She noticed something else. A faint tattoo, almost invisible behind his right ear, partially obscured by dirt. It was a small, stylized raven holding a scythe. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew that mark. It was the unofficial insignia of a Tier 1 unit, a unit whispered about in classified briefings, a unit known for getting its hands very, very dirty. Suddenly, this was not a homeless John Doe. This was an operator. A high-level operator, down and out in a civilian hospital where no one knew who he was. She immediately checked his vitals again. His blood pressure was dropping. His heart rate was becoming erratic. She lifted his eyelids. His right pupil was blown wide, completely unresponsive. The left was a pinpoint. The unequal pupils confirmed the head bleed, the one Finch had casually dismissed. A rapidly expanding epidural hematoma. He didn't have hours. He had minutes. But there was something else wrong. His skin was cold, too cold, and clammy. She checked his core temperature. It was plummeting. The pattern was wrong for a simple traumatic brain injury. Head trauma usually didn't cause such a rapid drop in core temp. Her mind raced, sifting through a mental database of field medicine, of exotic wounds and chemical agents. Plummeting core temperature, erratic heart rate, neurological signs. It clicked into place with the sickening certainty of a rifle bolt locking home. It mimicked the symptoms of severe hypothermia, but it was a chemical signature. An experimental organophosphate, a nerve agent designed to be subtle, to be misdiagnosed until it was too late. Standard treatment for the head injury would ignore the real killer. The agent would shut down his autonomic nervous system within the hour. She had to move. Now. She ripped back the curtain and strode out into the main ER, her eyes scanning for Finch. She found him preening for a couple of medical students, explaining the delicate art of suturing Mr. Albright's wrist. "Dr. Finch," she said. Her voice was not a whisper. It was clear and firm. It cut through his lecture. He turned, an annoyed expression on his face. "What is it, Vance? Can't you see I'm busy?" "It's the John Doe," she said, her voice low and urgent. "He needs an immediate head CT, right now, and a full toxicology screen for cholinesterase inhibitors. I think he has an epidural hematoma, and he's been exposed to a nerve agent." Finch stared at her. For a moment, he was speechless. Then, he threw his head back and laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. The medical students looked uncomfortable. Greg, the sycophant nurse, chuckled along with him. "A nerve agent?" Finch said, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "Nurse Vance, have you been reading spy novels on your break? He's a homeless drunk who fell and hit his head. The most exotic chemical in his system is probably cheap vodka. Doctor, his pupils are fixed and unequal. His GCS is dropping, and his core temperature has fallen 2 degrees in 10 minutes. He's crashing. He will die if we don't move him now." Finch's amusement vanished, replaced by cold fury. He stepped toward her, his body radiating menace. "Let me be very clear. Are you a doctor, Nurse Vance? Did you attend medical school? Do you hold the title of Chief of Trauma Surgery at this hospital?" "No, sir, but..." "But nothing. You are a nurse, a barely competent one at that. I have given my orders for that patient. He is stable, and he will wait his turn. You are 1,000 miles out of your lane. Now, I want you to go back to your patient, follow my instructions to the letter, and never, ever presume to question my diagnosis again. Is that understood?" He stared her down, expecting her to crumple. He expected the usual downcast eyes, the whispered apology. He did not get it. Alara looked him straight in the eye. She saw the ego, the pride, the utter certainty that he could do no wrong. And she saw the dead man on the gurney behind her. She had followed orders once before when her gut told her they were wrong. The memory of the result was etched onto her soul. Never again.
No, she said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the space between them with the force of a physical blow. Finch's face went purple with rage. What did you just say to me? You are wrong, doctor, she said, her voice gaining strength. And if you don't let me treat him, you will be killing him. For a split second, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then Finch's face twisted into a snarl. That's it. You're done. Consider your employment terminated. Security, he bellowed. I want this woman escorted off the premises immediately. But Alara wasn't listening. She had already turned her back on him. Insubordination was a line she had just crossed. There was no going back. All that mattered now was the man on the gurney. She ran to the alcove. An orderly was standing there, ready to move the patient to the holding area. Change of plans, Alara said, her voice ringing with an authority that stunned him into silence. Dr. Finch wants him in C, T, stat. It's a priority 1. The orderly blinked, confused. But he just said, Are you questioning a direct order? Alara shot back, her gaze hard as flint. The orderly flinched and shook his head. Let's go, she commanded, grabbing the end of the gurney and pushing it out into the corridor. She moved with a speed and purpose that was utterly alien to the Bambi persona. She knew the hospital layout like the back of her hand. She knew the shortcuts. More importantly, she knew the bypass codes. As they raced toward the radiology department, she saw Finch and 2 burly security guards hurrying toward her. They were shouting her name. There was no time. She shoved the gurney toward the CT scanner room. Get him prepped, she yelled at the stunned technician. She didn't wait for a response. She peeled off in the opposite direction, sprinting toward the hospital's disaster preparedness cache in the sub-basement. She swiped her ID, but the door required a secondary authorization. Level 4, Chief of Staff and above. She didn't hesitate. She typed in a 7-digit override code, a code she had learned from a Delta Force medic during a joint ops training exercise years ago. A code that was supposed to be universal for most civilian infrastructure in a national emergency. The light on the lock blinked green. The door clicked open. Inside were rows of sealed containers. She found what she was looking for, a case labeled Chempac C. She broke the seal, her hands moving with practiced speed. She grabbed 2 auto-injectors of atropine and, more importantly, a vial of a rare experimental chelating agent, pralidoxime chloride, but a much more potent, classified variant. It was the only thing that would bind to the specific agent she suspected and flush it from his system before it did irreversible damage. She pocketed the vials and injectors and ran back upstairs. The hospital was in an uproar. Her name was being called over the PA system. Security was converging on radiology. She slipped into the CT control room just as the technician was finishing the scan. The images were coming up on the screen. A massive white crescent was blooming against the dark gray of the brain. An epidural hematoma, just as she'd suspected. It was huge. The pressure was crushing his brainstem. He needs to go to an OR now, the technician gasped. There's no time, Alara said. She pushed past him into the scanner room. The operator was still on the gurney. She ripped open his shirt, uncapped the vial of the chelating agent, and drew it into a syringe. She couldn't wait for an IV drip. She had to get it into his system. She injected it directly into the large pectoral muscle, a technique for rapid absorption in the field. Then she grabbed the 2 atropine auto-injectors and slammed them into his thigh, one after the other. The door to the control room burst open. Dr. Finch stood there, flanked by the security guards, his face a thunderous mask of fury. There she is! Get her! He screamed. The guards rushed in as Alara was pulling the second injector from the operator's leg. They grabbed her arms, hauling her back roughly. You're fired, Vance, Finch spat, his face inches from hers. You're finished. I'll see to it you never work as a nurse again. Anywhere. You'll be lucky if you don't go to jail for assault and practicing medicine without a license. Alara didn't struggle. She let them pull her away. Her eyes were fixed on the patient. His vital signs were already beginning to stabilize on the monitor. The precipitous drop in his core temperature had arrested. His heart rate was evening out. She had bought him time. She had given him a chance. They dragged her through the ER, a public spectacle of disgrace. Her colleagues stared, a mixture of shock and fear on their faces. Chloe looked like she was about to cry. Greg just smirked, reveling in her downfall.
They didn't let her get her coat or her bag. They pushed her through the doors of the ambulance bay and out into the cold, rainy night. One of the guards threw her ID badge on the wet asphalt. "Don't come back," he grunted, before turning and going back inside. The doors hissed shut, leaving Alara alone in the darkness. The flashing lights of the ambulances reflected in the puddles around her. She was jobless, disgraced. Her quiet life was shattered. But as she stood there, shivering in her thin scrubs, a strange sense of calm washed over her. She had not frozen. She had not failed. She had done the right thing. Whatever came next, she would face it. She started walking, with no destination in mind, the cold rain plastering her hair to her face. Each step was a small act of defiance. She was halfway down the block when she heard it. A sound that cut through the city noise, a sound that belonged to her old life. Whoop, whoop, whoop. The distinctive, deep-throated beat of heavy rotor blades. It grew louder, closer. It wasn't a police chopper or a news helicopter. The sound was too heavy, too powerful. She looked up. Descending from the low clouds, two sleek black helicopters were dropping toward the hospital. They were unmarked. Their navigation lights were off. They looked like predators dropping out of the night sky. One of them began to hover over the multi-lane highway in front of the hospital, its rotor wash sending cars swerving and kicking up a cyclone of water and debris. The other circled in a protective pattern above. Black ropes snaked down from the hovering helicopter. Dark figures, clad in tactical gear, rappelled down onto the wet pavement with terrifying speed and precision. They moved like a pack of wolves, forming a perimeter, securing the highway in both directions. Traffic ground to a halt. People stared from their cars, their faces illuminated by the eerie glow of the helicopter's underbelly. The main doors of the ER burst open, but it wasn't security this time. It was a man in a crisp, decorated military uniform. A single star glittered on each of his shoulders. He was tall, imposing, with a face carved from granite and eyes that missed nothing. He strode into the middle of the trauma bay, his presence sucking all the air out of the room. The frantic energy of the ER died instantly. Everyone froze. Dr. Finch, who had been loudly recounting his version of Alara's insubordination, turned to face the newcomer. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone dripping with self-importance. "This is a sterile environment." The general ignored him completely. His gaze swept the room, searching. "I'm looking for a patient." The general's voice was a low rumble of command. "A John Doe, brought in from the interstate pileup." Finch puffed out his chest. "I am Dr. Alistair Finch, Chief of Trauma. That patient is under my care. He's being prepped for emergency surgery. If you'd like to wait." "I'm not here to talk to you." The general cut him off, his voice like ice. He turned to the nearest nurse, who happened to be Chloe. A nurse treated him. She defied orders to save his life. The paramedics called her Angel on the comms. "Where is she?" Chloe stared, her mouth opening and closing silently. She was terrified. "I asked you a question, young lady," the general said, his voice softening slightly, but losing none of its authority. She was fired," Chloe stammered, glancing fearfully at Finch. "Dr. Finch fired her. Security took her away." The general's cold eyes locked onto Finch. For the first time, Finch looked uncertain. A flicker of fear crossed his face. "There was a protocol violation," he began, his voice losing its bluster. "The nurse was unstable, insubordinate." "You fired the one person on this entire continent who could save my asset's life?" the general said, each word a chip of ice. He keyed the radio on his shoulder. "Patriot 6, this is Titan. The package is here, but the Angel is compromised. Civilian interference. Locate and retrieve her. Now." As he spoke, a black, armored SUV with tinted windows had detached from the military perimeter and was cruising slowly down the street. It screeched to a halt right beside Alara. The passenger window slid down with a quiet hum. A soldier in full combat gear, his face grim, looked out at her. "Ma'am," he said, his voice respectful. "Are you Nurse Vance?" Alara just nodded, water dripping from her chin. "General Thorne requests your presence, ma'am. Please, get in." The back door opened. Alara didn't hesitate. She slid into the clean, quiet interior of the vehicle. It smelled of leather and ozone. The door closed, shutting out the world. The SUV executed a smooth, three-point turn and sped back toward the hospital. The vehicle pulled right up to the ambulance bay doors, which slid open as if by magic. The SUV drove directly inside, stopping in the middle of the ER floor. The soldiers who had rappelled from the helicopter now stood guard, their weapons held at a low ready, their presence a silent, overwhelming threat. The hospital staff were pressed against the walls, their faces a mixture of terror and awe. The soldier opened the door for Alara. She stepped out, her wet scrubs clinging to her hair a mess. She looked small and bedraggled next to the armored vehicle and the heavily armed men. The general, who Alara now recognized as General Marcus Thorne, a legendary figure in the Spec Ops community, saw her. His stern expression softened with something that looked like relief. He walked toward her, his boots clicking on the linoleum. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes scanning her, taking in her appearance. "Sergeant?" he asked, his voice low, for her ears only. Alara straightened her shoulders. The slouch was gone. The timid look in her eyes was replaced by a clear, steady gaze. She gave a single, sharp nod. General Thorne's eyes flickered with recognition and something deeper. Respect. "Valkyrie," he murmured, using the call sign she hadn't heard in 2 long years. She held his gaze. "Titan," she replied, her voice steady. The general nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. Then he turned, his face hardening once more as he addressed the entire room, his voice booming with authority. His eyes found Dr. Finch, who looked like he had seen a ghost. "This is former Technical Sergeant Alara Vance," the general announced. "As of this moment, by the authority granted to me by the Department of Defense under the National Security Act, she is in complete and total charge of the patient you know as John Doe. Her authority in this matter supersedes that of anyone in this hospital, including you, Dr. Finch." He walked over to the stunned surgeon, stopping so close their chests were almost touching. "You are to provide Sergeant Vance with any and all personnel, equipment, and resources she requires. You will do so without question and without delay. If you hesitate, if you argue, if you so much as look at her the wrong way, I will have you arrested for interfering with a matter of critical national security. Do you understand me?" Finch was pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He managed a weak, strangled nod. He looked from the general to Alara, his mind unable to process the cataclysmic shift in the universe. The mousy, incompetent nurse he had fired was now the most powerful person in his hospital. "Good," the general said. He turned back to Alara. "Sergeant, your patient." Alara nodded. The time for hiding was over. She was Valkyrie again, and she had a mission. "Get him to the best neuro-op suite you have. I want your top anesthesiologist and 2 of your best surgical nurses. And get me a full printout of his blood work, toxicology, and the full CT scan series. Now." Her voice was pure command. The staff, including a wide-eyed Chloe, scrambled to obey. The spell of Dr. Finch was broken. A new power was in charge. The neurosurgery operating room was a cold, bright space, a temple of chrome and technology. Alara stood over the patient, now identified by General Thorne as Master Sergeant Elias Thorne, his son. The general stood in the corner of the room, out of the way but radiating an intense protective energy. 2 of his soldiers stood guard outside the door. Finch had been forced to assign his best neurosurgeon, a competent but nervous woman named Dr. Eris, to perform the craniotomy. Alara was not a surgeon, but she knew exactly what needed to be done. She directed the procedure with a calm, unnerving precision. "The bleed is located," Dr. Eris said, her voice tight. "Beginning evacuation." "Watch his pressure," Alara commanded, her eyes glued to the bank of monitors. The agent in his system could cause a paradoxical hypertensive crisis under anesthesia. "Be ready to counter with nicardipine, not labetalol." Dr. Eris looked at her, surprised. "That's an unusual choice." "Just do it," Alara said, her tone leaving no room for argument. The surgery was tense but successful. They evacuated the hematoma, relieving the pressure on his brain. As they were closing, General Thorne approached the table. "Sergeant Vance," he said quietly, "we need to talk." He led her to an adjacent observation room. "The car crash was not an accident," he began without preamble. "Elias was returning from a deep cover operation. He has information. Information that got his entire team killed. He's the sole survivor." "The data unit," Alara stated. The general nodded. "It's a biometric drive, keyed to his DNA. It contains irrefutable proof of a mole. A very senior official in the intelligence community, who who was selling operational secrets to a private military corporation called Argentis. They're a ruthless group of former operators, and they've been hunting Elias for a week. They tried to take him out with that chemical agent, make it look like an overdose. When that didn't work, they engineered the crash. Alara's blood ran cold. This was bigger than she could have imagined. They know he's here. It wasn't a question.
I'm afraid so, the general confirmed. Finch. When you were escorted out, he made a phone call. We were monitoring his office. He's on Argentis' payroll. He was their insurance policy. He was supposed to make sure Elias died on the table, or at least delay treatment long enough for the agent to finish the job. You ruined his plan. He just told them Elias is alive, and that a ghost is protecting him.
Valkyrie, Alara breathed. Some of them would know the name.
Exactly. They know who you are, which means they know what you're capable of. They won't send another lone wolf. They'll send a team. This hospital is compromised. It's a hard target now. Just as he finished speaking, a muffled pop echoed from the hallway, like a book falling. It was the sound of a silenced pistol. One of the soldiers guarding the OR door stumbled into the room, a hand clutching his chest, before collapsing. "Contact!" the other soldier yelled, taking a defensive position in the doorway. Alara didn't hesitate. Her body moved on pure instinct. She shoved General Thorne behind a heavy supply cabinet. "Stay down," she ordered. She grabbed a heavy stainless steel surgical tray. A man dressed as a hospital janitor appeared in the doorway, a silenced pistol in his hand. He was fast, but Alara was faster. She hurled the tray like a discus. It caught him square in the face with a sickening crunch of metal on bone and cartilage. He staggered back, stunned, his aim thrown off. The remaining soldier fired a controlled burst from his rifle, stitching 3 rounds across the janitor's chest. The man dropped like a stone. Alara was already moving, stripping the pistol and spare magazines from the dead assassin. She checked the chamber, her movements fluid and economical. "The hospital is a kill box," she said to the general, her voice grim. "We have to get him out of here, now." "My men have the exits locked down," the general said, emerging from behind the cabinet, his own sidearm now in his hand. "But Argentis will have a team in place outside. They might even try to come in posing as law enforcement." "We don't use the exits," Alara said, her mind already working, mapping the building. "Give me 2 of your men, the quietest ones you have. We're taking the service tunnels." The plan was audacious. They couldn't risk moving a post-op patient through the main floors. Alara directed the team to disconnect Elias from the stationary monitors, switching him to a portable unit. They bundled him onto a gurney. "Chloe," Alara said, finding the young nurse who was huddled in a corner, pale with fright. "I need your help. I need you to create a diversion." Chloe looked terrified, but then she looked at Alara, at the weapon in her hand, and the absolute certainty in her eyes. She nodded. "What do you need me to do?" "In 5 minutes, I want you to hit the main fire alarm on this floor. Then get yourself somewhere safe." Chloe nodded again, a flicker of courage in her eyes. Alara led the small team, consisting of the general, 2 of his quietest operators, and the still unconscious Elias on the gurney, to a service elevator at the far end of the surgical wing. She used another code to access it. "Laundry room, sub-level 2, she said. The elevator descended into the guts of the hospital. The air grew thick and humid. They emerged into a cavernous room filled with industrial washing machines and carts piled high with soiled linens. Just then, the fire alarm began to shriek through the building. Sprinklers kicked on in the hallways above, creating chaos. The perfect diversion. "They'll be watching the main loading dock," Alara said. "But there's a secondary chute for biohazard disposal. It leads to a sealed container in the back alley. The truck comes at 0400. It's 0345 now." "Are you suggesting we hide him in a biohazard truck?" the general asked, his eyebrows raised. "I'm suggesting we hide in the truck," Alara corrected. "It's our best shot." They moved through the labyrinthine basement, Alara in the lead, pistol raised. They found the chute. One of the soldiers pried open the access door. It was a tight fit. They carefully lowered Elias into the large, empty container first, then followed, pulling the hatch closed from the inside. They sat in darkness, surrounded by the acrid smell of disinfectant. They could hear sirens approaching the hospital, a mixture of fire trucks and, undoubtedly, the fake police units Argentis was using. Minutes later, they felt a heavy jolt as the truck's crane arm hooked the container.
They were lifted into the air, then lowered onto the flatbed of a truck. The engine rumbled to life. They were moving. They had made it out. The truck rumbled through the sleeping city. Inside the dark, cramped container, Alara worked by the dim light of a tactical penlight, monitoring Elias's vitals. He was stable, for now. "Where are we going, Valkyrie?" the general asked, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. "My people can have a C-17 at any airfield in an hour." "Too public," Alara said, not looking up from her work. "Argentus will have eyes on every airstrip. They'll be expecting a military evac. We need to disappear, go off the grid completely." She finally looked at him. "There's a place, north of here, in the National Forest, a decommissioned ranger station. It's remote, defensible, and I have it stocked." The general was silent for a moment. "Stocked with what?" "Contingencies," she replied. She used a satellite phone from one of the operator's kits to make a single, brief call, giving the truck driver new directions. An hour later, the truck shuddered to a halt on a deserted logging road. The back of the container opened. The dawn was just breaking, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink. The air was crisp and smelled of pine. They transferred Elias to a tactical ATV they had arranged to have waiting. The small convoy, Alara, the general, and the two soldiers, made their way deeper into the forest, following a trail that was barely there. After another 30 minutes, they arrived. The cabin was small, made of dark wood, nestled in a thick grove of pine trees. It looked abandoned, but Alara knew better. She unlocked the reinforced door. Inside, it was Spartan but clean. There were cots, a fireplace, and, in a back room, shelves stocked with medical supplies, MREs, water, and several locked hard cases. They moved Elias inside, making him as comfortable as possible on one of the cots. Alara immediately set up a fresh IV and hooked him up to a portable vital signs monitor she had brought from the cabin's stash. The general watched her as she worked, her movements a seamless blend of medic and soldier. "You've been planning for something like this," he observed. "I believe in being prepared," Alara said simply. She opened one of the hard cases. Inside, nestled in foam, were 2 M4 rifles, several sidearms, and stacks of ammunition. She handed a rifle to each of the soldiers and one to the general. She kept the last one for herself. "They'll track us," one of the soldiers, a young sergeant named Diaz, said grimly. "They have resources." "I know," Alara said. "That's the point. We're drawing them away from the city, away from civilians. We're making ourselves the bait." She looked out the small, dirty window into the dense woods. "This is our ground now. Let them come." As the day wore on, Elias began to stir. He moaned, his eyelids fluttering. Alara was by his side instantly, checking his pupils. They were equal, responsive. The surgery had worked. The antidote had worked. His eyes finally opened. They were hazy, confused. They focused on her face. "Angel," he rasped, his voice rough. "Rest, Sergeant," Alara said softly. "You're safe." He tried to sit up, a lifetime of training fighting against the trauma his body had endured. "The data. Finch. He—" "We know," the general said, stepping forward. "We know everything, son, thanks to you. And to Sergeant Vance." Elias looked from his father to Alara, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He looked at the rifle she held, at the determined set of her jaw. "Valkyrie," he whispered, the name a breath of recognition. He had heard the stories. The legendary PJ who had vanished. Suddenly, Diaz, who was watching the perimeter, stiffened. "Contact," he hissed. "Movement. East Ridge. At least a dozen of them. Maybe more." Alara moved to the window, her rifle up. She could see them through the trees, dark shapes moving with professional discipline. They were fanning out, forming a cordon around the cabin. Argentus had found them. The siege was about to begin. "Barricade the door," Alara commanded. "Diaz, you take the back window. Rourke, you're with me at the front. General, stay with your son. You have one job. Keep him alive." The forest, which had been peaceful moments before, erupted in a cacophony of automatic weapons fire. Bullets ripped through the wooden walls of the cabin, sending splinters flying. The windows shattered. Alara and her small team returned fire, their shots controlled and precise. They were heavily outnumbered. Argentus was moving in, using the trees for cover, advancing relentlessly. The firefight was brutal, a desperate exchange of lead and fury. Rourke, the other soldier, went down with a cry, a round catching him in the shoulder. Diaz was pinned down at the back. "They're flanking us!" Diaz shouted over the din. Alara knew they couldn't hold out for long. They were being systematically surrounded and overwhelmed. The Argentis commander, a man with a scarred face and cold, dead eyes, was directing the assault from the front, pushing his men forward. Elias, lying on the cot, was struggling to sit up. "Give me a weapon," he grunted to his father. The general hesitated for a second, then handed him a pistol. Elias's hands were shaking, but his grip was firm. The front door of the cabin exploded inwards, blown off its hinges by a breaching charge. Smoke and dust filled the small space. Through the haze, the scarred Argentis commander stepped in, his rifle raised. He saw Alara and smiled, a cruel, triumphant smirk. "Valkyrie," he sneered. "I've been waiting a long time for this." He leveled his rifle at her. But in that split second, Elias, from his position on the cot, yelled, "Valkyrie, down!" Alara didn't think. She reacted. She dropped to the floor as Elias fired the pistol. The round was unsteady, but it struck the commander in the thigh. He roared in pain and surprise, his own burst of fire going wide, chewing up the wall where Alara's head had been. That was all the opening she needed. She surged up from the floor like a viper, not with her rifle, but with the combat knife she had drawn from her boot. She closed the distance in 2 steps, a blur of motion. She deflected his rifle with one hand and drove the knife home with the other, a swift, brutal, and silent motion. The commander's eyes went wide with shock. He crumpled to the floor, his assault over. The death of their leader seemed to break the momentum of the Argentis team. Just as quickly, the sound of the firefight changed. A new set of weapons had joined the fray, heavier, more disciplined. From the west, a team of Army Rangers, alerted by the general's emergency transponder, had arrived. The hunters had become the hunted. Within minutes, the remaining Argentis mercenaries were either dead or surrendering. The battle was over. The cabin was a wreck, riddled with bullet holes, but they were alive. Alara stood in the middle of the room, breathing heavily, the bloody knife still in her hand. Elias was watching her from the cot, his expression a mixture of awe and gratitude. The quiet, clumsy nurse was gone forever. Valkyrie was back. Back in the city, Dr. Alistair Finch was having the best day of his life. He stood at a podium in the main lobby of Metropolitan General, surrounded by news cameras. He had spun the story perfectly. He was the hero, the dedicated doctor who had been forced to fire a dangerously unstable nurse. That same nurse, he claimed, had then kidnapped his patient with the help of armed extremists. He was the victim. He was in control. This hospital, our city, was put at risk by the reckless actions of one disturbed individual, he said, his voice resonating with false sincerity. But I can assure the public that the situation is under control, and our primary concern has always been, and will always be, patient safety. He was about to take a question when the main entrance doors of the lobby flew open with a loud bang. The reporters and hospital staff turned as one. Framed in the doorway was General Marcus Thorne, his uniform immaculate, his face like stone. Behind him stood a phalanx of grim-faced military police. They wheeled a gurney into the lobby. On it, sitting up, was Master Sergeant Elias Thorne. He looked pale and weak, but his eyes were sharp and clear. And walking beside the gurney, her posture straight, her head held high, was Alara Vance. She was no longer in scrubs or tactical gear. She wore a simple black jacket and pants. She looked directly at Finch, her gaze unwavering. A wave of gasps and murmurs went through the crowd. Finch's jaw dropped. He stared at the scene, his mind short-circuiting. This was impossible. They were supposed to be dead. Elias raised a hand and pointed a trembling but steady finger at the surgeon. "That man," he said, his voice weak but carrying across the suddenly silent lobby. "Dr. Alistair Finch. He's the one. He took a bribe from Argentis PMC. He tried to murder me." "This is absurd. Slander," Finch sputtered, his face draining of all color. "This man is clearly delirious. And she," he pointed a shaking finger at Alara, "has brainwashed him. She's a kidnapper, a lunatic." General Thorne stepped forward. "Is she, doctor?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. An aide stepped up beside him and held out a tablet. On the screen, a video began to play, broadcast onto the large monitors in the lobby for everyone to see. It was a security feed from Finch's office. The audio was crystal clear.
It was Finch's voice, talking to the Argentis contact. "The SEAL is still alive," Finch's voice echoed through the lobby. "Some ghost nurse is protecting him. Yes, I'm sure. Just get your team here. Finish the job. I want my money." The recording ended. The silence in the lobby was absolute. Finch's face had collapsed into a mask of pure horror. He looked around wildly, like a trapped animal. "It's fake! A deep fake! They're framing me!" he shrieked. The general's aide handed a second tablet to a waiting city police detective who had been observing from the edge of the crowd. "And these are his offshore bank records, detective, showing a payment of $2 million from a shell corporation owned by Argentis, deposited this morning." Finch let out a strangled sob. No, it's all a lie. I'm the chief of surgery. I'm a hero." His rant was cut short as two of the military police officers stepped forward, flanking him. "Dr. Alastair Finch," one of them said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, and on behalf of federal authorities, for treason." They snapped handcuffs on his wrists. The clicking sound echoed in the silent room. Finch began to weep, his arrogance shattering into a million pieces. "You can't do this to me! I'm important!" he wailed as they dragged him away, past the flashing cameras of the press, past the shocked and disgusted faces of his former colleagues. Greg, the sycophant, shrank back against a wall, trying to become invisible. Chloe stood watching, tears of vindication streaming down her face. General Thorne stepped up to the podium Finch had just vacated. He cleared his throat. "My son, Master Sergeant Elias Thorne, is a decorated American hero who was targeted for uncovering a dangerous conspiracy." He paused, letting his words sink in. Then he turned and gestured to Alara. "This woman, who Dr. Finch publicly humiliated and fired, is the reason my son is alive today. He called her an angel, but that's not her name. Her name is Alara Vance. She is a former Air Force pararescue jumper, APJ. She is the recipient of the Air Force Cross for Valor, among numerous other commendations. The people she served with didn't call her Bambi. They called her Valkyrie." Another wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. The story was rewriting itself in real time. The clumsy nurse was a war hero. The arrogant doctor was a traitor. The general looked out at the assembled staff. "She saved his life in this hospital, defying a direct, incompetent order. She saved him again when an assassin came for him. And she saved him a third time when they were besieged by a team of trained killers. She is, without question, the finest combat medic I have ever had the honor to serve with." He looked directly at Alara, his voice filled with profound respect. "The United States government and the Thorne family are forever in her debt." Later, in a quiet office upstairs, the chaos of the lobby felt a world away. It was just Alara, General Thorne, and Elias, who was now resting in a proper hospital bed, looking exhausted but content. "The Department of the Air Force has been petitioning for you to come back," the general said, his tone now warm and personal. "They want you at Lackland, to rewrite the curriculum for PJ medical training. It's a prestigious post." Alara was quiet, considering it. It would be a return, but a return to the classroom. "But I have a counteroffer," the general continued, a gleam in his eye. "I'm using this incident to get authorization for a project I've been pushing for years. A new unit, small, fast, and lethal. A joint special operations medical response team. It won't be attached to any single branch. It will answer directly to SOCOM. It will be tasked with high-risk extractions, deep field medicine, and crisis response anywhere in the world. A team of the best medics on the planet. I don't want you to teach, Alara. I want you to build it. And I want you to lead it. You'll have a blank check and my full authority. Name your terms." Alara looked at Elias. He was watching her, a small, genuine smile on his face. He didn't say anything, but his eyes conveyed everything. Trust, respect, partnership. For the first time in a very long time, Alara Vance smiled back. A real smile, one that wasn't forced or fragile. It was a smile that reached her eyes and erased the last shadows of the timid nurse she had pretended to be.
It was the smile of a warrior who had found her way home. She turned back to the general. "I accept," she said, her voice clear and strong. The final scene was not one of chaos, but of quiet purpose. A few days later, Alara Vance walked out of the main entrance of Metropolitan General for the last time. She wasn't being thrown out. She was leaving on her own terms. Beside her, walking slowly but steadily, was Elias Thorne. He was in civilian clothes, still recovering, but the strength was returning to him day by day. As they walked down the steps and into the bright afternoon sun, he stumbled slightly. Without a word, Alara put a steadying hand on his arm. He looked at her and smiled. She smiled back. They walked past the bustling entrance, past the world of beeping monitors and antiseptic smells, the world she had used as a hiding place. They walked toward a black SUV waiting at the curb, the same kind that had come to her rescue. A new mission was waiting, a new life. She was no longer Nurse Vance, the timid Bambi. She was not even just Valkyrie, the ghost of a past life. She was Alara, whole and complete, walking into the future, no longer afraid and no longer alone. She had found her purpose not by running from her past, but by embracing it, and she would never hide again. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content, and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. The story of Alara Vance teaches us a powerful lesson about judging others. Just because someone appears quiet or unassuming does not mean they are weak or incompetent. True strength and skill often lie hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. It also shows that true leadership isn't about ego or titles, like Dr. Finch had, but about courage, competence, and doing the right thing, even when it's hard. Ilara's journey is a reminder that standing up for what is right, even at great personal cost, is the ultimate measure of character. In the end, doing the right thing always pays off, and heroes are defined by their actions, not the opinions of those who would underestimate them. What would you do if you were in Alara's position? Would you have risked your career to save a patient that your boss had written off? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button and make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Have a nice rest of your day.